Good morning and welcome back to the program. Today we're talking all about relationships and what it takes to find lasting love. Now, one man who has made a career writing about relationships, author Curtis Bunn. Curtis, welcome to the show. Glad to have you here. And I understand you have an interesting past, much like what I know, and that is you were a sports journalist, right? A journalism professor at Morehouse College.
Yes.
And then you got into relationships. Tell me how all this goes together.
Well, thanks for having me, first of all,
Sure.
Adam. I grew up in Washington, D.C. as a young man who wanted to be an athlete, but my parents instilled in me the idea of education, and I ended up pursuing journalism. Sports journalism was as an avenue to stay close to the game, and ended up having a long, lengthy career in New York, Washington, D.C., and here in Atlanta at the Journal-Constitution, covering sports, traveling the world. It became far bigger than I ever imagined when I made that decision at 13. That's what I wanted to do. But I also, at Christmas, my parents got my brothers and my sister and I books, and so I was always an avid reader. And somewhere around the late 90s, I started reading books about relationships, and I enjoyed them, and I said, you know what, I can do this. I can write a book about relationships just from a male's perspective. And that launched my first novel, Baggage Check, and since then I've written 6 others and finishing up an 8th.
Wow. That's quite an accomplishment there. And so your most recent novel, I understand, is titled The Old Man and the Club.
Yes.
There's a lot of those guys out there.
Yeah, they are. And it was a fun novel to write. I generally write about relationships from a male's perspective. Obviously, I want to give women, who are the vast majority of readers, what I call a high-definition insight into the mind of a man. And so I've written about men in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and now I took it up to the 60s. And so this man, Elliot Thomas, the story's based here in Atlanta. Elliot is on this mission to redeem himself, so to speak. And he starts dating younger women. And it's an adventure that is hilarious, insightful, moving. All the emotions are touched, and a very entertaining read.
Now, are these true stories, or are you actually writing fiction here, but also giving some advice within that book?
That's what I really enjoy most about from the responses I get from people, is that I learned a lot about men. I learned a lot about myself, even though it's not in a preachy fashion. It's a story that people can relate to. So they're not genuine stories. They're not, people can't look at it and say, this is me, but they can relate to the characters in one way, shape, or form.
Somewhere in there, it's definitely somebody, right?
You know what I mean?
And there's probably quite a few people that could fill that role.
Yes.
And, you know, it's a lot different too these days. Those that are trying to get into relationships, especially if you've been out, you know, if you've been in one for a long time, you're trying to start over.
Yeah.
Times are different. You got, you know, social media and texting and da.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what advice you would give these days.
It's very interesting. I moved here in 1996, freshly single out of a marriage, and one of my friends told me to pace yourself, because Atlanta is an animal in terms of the single opportunities. It's very social. I think it's a haven for men who are single to go out and meet intelligent women, women who have an opportunity, women who are doing things for themselves, great women in a lot of aspects. So it's a jungle for men. And it's probably worse for women, because the stats say 80,000 more eligible women than men. And so for them, it's a line that they have to toe. And I talked about that in 7 points about what it's like to be single for a woman in this city.
Yeah, you see your website, curtisbunn.com. Now, you have 7 points. I want you to go through them, because I think this will be helpful to our viewers. Yeah. Here they are on your screen. 7 things men look for in a woman. Can you tell me about this?
Well, Adam, somebody came up with this notion that men are visual, and you know what? They're right.
Yes,
That's
they
the
are.
first thing. You know, our initial interest in someone is derived from what we see of them, and so that alone sparks can spark a conversation, and not just her body, but her smile, how she carries herself, how she shows up. Does she command the room, or does she recede into the background? Those kind of physical attributes matter first and foremost.
So physical attraction.
Physical attraction matters. Then there's a genuine nature. We don't like phoniness, and in this town, it's probably really challenging for women to just not to be themselves, to feel like it's comfortable to be themselves, because there's so much competition. But men can detect it. So if you're trying to project something that you're not, it will come out, and it seems forced, and it's not real, and then it'll come out in the wash eventually. So a genuine caring nature, authenticity is very important.
Okay, and what are some of these others here? Here we go. So genuine nature, you mentioned?
Yes, selflessness. if you start a conversation with a woman and the conversation always comes back, no matter what the subject, back to her, that tells you that she's self-centered. And really, certain times that can work, but generally speaking, it should be a back and forth about the subject and not about you. And I think, again, because of the pressure to produce, of the competition, the numbers are so jaded, there's this idea that I have to impress. But it's much easier to just show that you're intelligent, because that's not even on the list, but that's actually number 2 behind physical attraction for me. You have to have a brain, you have to have interests, you have to be able to articulate what's going on in your mind and in your world, and that will pay dividends in terms of a man's interest in you.
Well, when you talked about selflessness, I think you hit the nail on the head, because oftentimes we all want to talk about ourselves, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we can only relate to what we know, so we always want to talk about ourselves. Ask about the other person,
Yes.
right? Get to know them a little bit.
Yes.
So what are some of the other points? Here we go.
Compassion.
Okay.
There's this idea that that men are looking for women with. Women always say, "Oh, I want a man with a little edge to him. You know, a little thug, a little edge where he's a little rowdy at times, but not to a tipping point, but certainly have that in there." That's not what men want. Men want women who are tender and kind and gentle and have a compassionate heart. That shows that they care, that they're a caring person, and they'll be caring with me.
Okay, so let's move through these next few.
Okay.
I think independence was next on the list.
Yeah, independence is very important.
Okay.
You have to have a world outside of our world. So if we're in a relationship, it's important that you have interests outside of it, whether it's reading, bicycling, going to the gym, hanging with your friends. You should have a section of friends, because that kind of shows that you are likable beyond me.
Yeah, and poise, I think, was next on.
Poise is important. If we go to a restaurant and our table isn't ready on time, you should not be flustered by that. No matter what the scenario is, you should be calm, handle it appropriately with grace. I think grace is a key element to everyone, particularly women. And so if you are poised, and that shows me in heated situations between you and I, it won't escalate to a level of something that neither one of us will want.
And then I think the final thing was spontaneity, right?
Yeah, have some versatility. I'm a planner. I love to plan stuff, but if the weather changes, if the mood changes, just go with it. Have fun, be adventurous, and not be so regimented that I'm just going to do this because this is what we said we're going to do.
I'm going to add one to the list, if you don't mind.
Please.
And please don't laugh, but I'm going to add good eater. Okay, because I can't tell you how many dates, before I met my wife. You eat, ladies. It's okay. It's okay to eat. In fact, guys like to have somebody to go out to dinner with that will eat a meal and not be embarrassed by it.
I agree. That goes back to being genuine. Just be who you are. If you're going to go home after the date and throw down on a steak, you might as well have it while we're out, while I'm paying.
I love it. Great job.
Thank
Very
you.
good advice. Thanks for
Appreciate
being
it.
so much.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for being on the show. You had some great stuff there, Curtis. CurtisBunn.com for more details and information on him. And when we come back, we're putting all of this relationship advice to the test. We have a single man, a single woman right here in the studio, and we'll see what they have to say about all of this these days, coming up right after the break.